Hey everyone, Brandon here with Galway Precision. Today we're going to go over the installation of our newest product for the PF-9 made by Kel-Tec, which is our short stroke hammer kit. It's going to come with a short stroke hammer based off of our LC9 hammer. The Kel-Tec PF-9 and the LC9 by Ruger share a lot of the same mechanisms and operate the same way. Biggest difference is there's even more pre-travel in the PF-9 than there is in LC9. So if you already have a short stroke trigger, this is being sold separately as well. It will work with the stock trigger or your previously purchased short stroke trigger. The new kits, if you don't have the short stroke trigger already, will come with your choice of either the RTK short stroke trigger, which right now is the only option. But here soon we should have some of our Solomon triggers in that we have modified to work in the PF-9. They will have on top of the pre-travel stop an actual pre-travel screw because the PF-9 does have a lot more pre-travel than the LC9. And of course all their colors that we sell them in will be on there as well. Alright, so first let's go over the tools that we're going to need to accomplish this install today. You're going to need a power drill with a 3/16 bit. You're going to need your bench block, gun oil. You need some VC3 and or blue Loctite, your .050 Allen wrench, a 1/16 or 2mm punch, straight pick, 1/8 inch punch, shepherd's crook pick, and your brass or polymer hammer. If you have both a brass and polymer, I'd suggest getting both. If you're like me and you've got a double-sided hammer, that'll work great. And alright, so we're ready to go ahead and get started. So let's go ahead and lock and clear the pistol. We see that it is visually and physically empty. Drop the magazine, set it off to the side. Now the way I like to do this, any of you who own this know that getting this takedown can be a pain, especially for people like me. You don't keep fingernails. It's hard to get up in there without trying to pry your fingernail off. So what I like to do is take my shepherd's hook, get it down in there, and you just turn like that and takedown will come right out. Alright, so let's go ahead and set it off to the side. We're going to take the slide off. We're not going to be doing anything in the slide, so we can set it off to the side as well. Alright, go ahead and take your bench block, flip it upside down to where it's on the flat side. And go ahead and take our shepherd's crook and we're going to unseat the hammer spring cup, correction. Now if you go to do that and that pops out, that's normal. Keep an eye on that. You're going to need that roll pin to go back into the hammer spring cup. So we're going to set that off to the side. Now we're going to go ahead and take our frame pins out. Alright, we've got our frame pins out. Now we're going to pull the chassis out of the frame. Alright, so when you guys are doing this, be sure to keep your thumb and forefinger around the front of the chassis, because as you start to pry up on it, you can see that the slide lock lever is under spring tension and the trigger bar is under spring tension. Can't see the spring yet. There it is. And so if you just go ripping this out, things are going to go flying. So grab to where you got a hold of the trigger bar right here, and you've got the slide lock spring and lever in your thumb, and just go ahead and pull straight up. Alright, we're done with the frame. We'll set it off to the side. Now I like to take off the trigger bar and let the return spring forward. Don't get your finger in the way. It doesn't hurt greatly, but it lets you know it's there. Flip it back over. We're going to take our slide lock off and our spring. Notice how I kept my thumb over it. When you go to move this off, if you don't keep a thumb or finger over that, it's going to spring off and you're going to have a hard time finding it. Alright, so let's go ahead and take our 1/8 inch punch and we're going to push out the hammer pin. We're going to take our hammer out and set it off to the side. Now I'm going to show you how to make this hole in the chassis like I did. This one's already been drilled obviously, but we're still going to put it in the vise and show you. This is the stock trigger that I reinstalled. this is a rarity that the trigger itself didn't break. 99% of the time when you go to change the trigger out in a PF-9, when you go to drive this pin out, it's going to break your plastic trigger. All right, so the first thing we're going to do, this hole is going to be just big enough to take your 1/16 punch and drive out the trigger pin. All right, just like that. Now it's going to take a lot more than that, because as you can see, this one's already been out a couple times, but you see all those ridges in the plastic, in the pin, they bite into the plastic, so it's hard to drive it back out so that the trigger doesn't fall out. But now that we have that out, we can go ahead and push our trigger pivot and trigger turn spring out. We're going to take this trigger. All right, we're done with it. You'll put it back in your bag. All right, so now we're going to get everything set up on the vise and show you how to do that. All right, so we're set up in the vise, ready to drill our hole for the pivot pin, or correction, not the pivot pin, the trigger pin that goes into the trigger pivot. All right, so we're set up in our vise. Now what I do is I'll take cardboard or wood, set it on both sides. Now this is aluminum, so it's very important that you just make it snug. Don't over tighten it, because you'll squeeze the chassis and the gun will be ruined. All right, so now we're going to take our drill, and this is where you're going to put, you'll notice, again, we've already drilled this one, but on one that has not been drilled, on yours, you're going to see a little 1/16 hole. Use that as a pilot. Take the center of your drill, stick it right in that hole, and go on through just like that. Once you get it done, just do this a couple times, straight up and down, don't wallow it out. And then what you're doing is kind of deburring it with the drill bit itself. All right, so we're done with that, so let's go ahead and get it out and put it back on the mat, and we'll take over from there. All right guys, so we're back on the mat now. First thing you're going to do before we install anything, flip it over, and where you've drilled through, if you see any flesh left over from the drill, just take your 1/8 and use it like you would a deburr tool, and just pop that aluminum off there. All right, so now we're going to actually install the short stroke trigger. Since the majority of you already have it installed, and the fact that we don't have our modified Solomon yet. So you're going to take your short stroke trigger, I'm going to put it in, we're going to take our trigger pivot, slide it on through. Now sometimes the anodizing can be a little tricky on the inside of this, and if it's a little tight, what you can do is you can take the trigger pivot back out if you're having a hard time getting it to go through the trigger itself, and just take some 240 grit sandpaper. Alright, you take your 240 grit sandpaper, take your trigger pivot, and just give it a light sanding. We're not going crazy, we're just sanding it down some so we don't hurt the trigger, because if you modify the trigger, it's non-returnable. Alright, so take your pivot, once you get it to the size you need it, go ahead and put it on in there, and that's only if you need to, because you got to remember guys, this is 90% cast parts in the PF-9, just like the Ruger, so you're going to have some tolerance fluctuation from one piece to another, just because when you're doing metal injection molding and things like that, you're going to get contraction expansion in the die itself and the mold from constant heat cool, heat cool, heat cool. Anyhow, all right, so that's done. Let's go ahead and take our trigger return spring, making sure we've got our opening there, so when you put it back into the trigger, the arm is going to be oriented about 3 or 4 o'clock. All right, both the RTK strategic trigger and our Solomon trigger are going to come with the proper pin you need, which is why we opened up the hole. So let's go ahead and stick that down in there. Now this can be a little tough, because sometimes the trigger return spring doesn't want to squish all the way in. If it's giving you a hard time, what I like to do is I like to take the pad of my thumb and really mash on it so that it comes in. See how the arm of the trigger return spring sticks out a little bit? You want to get the circular part mashed in. This isn't going to hurt anything. Once you get the pin started, take your 1/8 inch pin punch, push it all the way in. If it's being difficult, just give it a light tap. Don't need to hammer incessantly, just give it a little, because what that is the ridge that's going to lock into the spring is just not wanting to pop past the spring quite yet. All right, so we've got that installed. We're done with the chassis for just this moment, so let's go ahead and set it off to the side. Next is going to be replacing the hammer. All right, so get it lined up on your bench block, and you're going to want to drive this pivot pin all the way through. All right, we want it to come out the other side. Let's take your 1/16 punch. Sometimes if it's getting it over the holes a little bit of a problem, hold it over the edge. Get the same use. All right, we've got our roll pin out. We're done with this hammer. That's your stock hammer, so you'll put it in your bag with your stock parts. All right, so now, this is very important. When you go to reinstall your roll pin, you're gonna have a cut in the back of it. What you don't want is that cut facing down or down into the rear, because what's gonna happen is it's gonna cock. Right here is where the hammer catch sits and catches the roll pin. Well, it's got one sharp edge. Guess where it likes to go? Right in that cut. So when you go to reinstall this, make sure that you have the pin with the cut facing up into the rear. Just like that. Up into the rear. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and tap that home a little bit till we get it started. All right, so now we're about flush on both sides. Right here, we're gonna go ahead and put the hammer spring in. Now, you see how the hammer spring cup and the frame are oriented. All right, you've got this round piece, and you've got this little piece that sticks out that locks in to the back of the frame. So when you're putting the hammer spring back on, make sure you orient it on the hammer. Flat part of the spring forward, round part of the spring back, just like this. So that way when you go to install it, this is in the proper position to lock into the frame. So what I like to do, just like we do with the LC9, so I will take the spring, and I will take the hammer, I will lock that part of the spring there against the face of the hammer there, and we're going to drive the pin home. All right, now we got it just enough to get started on the spring. Let's take your 1/16 punch on the flat part here and make sure that you drive the roll pin through and that it is equidistant on both sides, okay? Done with that part, so we're ready to reinstall everything. Let's go ahead and take our chassis, gonna put our hammer back in, take our hammer pin, install it. Now on some of the older models, the pin is tapered. This pin's tapered on one end anyway, but what that does is the older models, the tapered end goes in from right to left and it catches on this side. This is not a model that has that. This is a newer model that we literally just bought about 2 weeks ago. So you don't have to worry about that. So if you have an older model and you go to put the hammer pin in, it doesn't want to go all the way through, pull it out, flip it around, put it back in, you'll be good to go. We're going to take our gun oil. Now this is very key and very important, guys. A lot of you are over oiling your guns. You only need a thin film. Modern weapons do need lubrication. They don't need grease. It's not 1912. Unless you're dealing with bolt action and lugs and things like that. Modern pistols, you just need a thin coat of oil. And the reason you only want a thin coat and you don't want to go crazy is because what does oil and moisture naturally draw to it? Dirt, dust, debris. So being that this is about a pocket-sized gun, if you carry this in your pocket and you keep it over-oiled all the time, all of the debris, the lint, and everything in your pocket is going to get drawn in. You're going to gum up the works. It's not going to work when you need it to. So just a nice thin film, all right? Just like that. All right, now we're going to take our trigger bar, going to install it, sweeping the hammer forward, rotating the trigger return spring back, setting it in the groove. Now hold this in place because we're going to flip it over, put on our slide lock. Now when you install the slide lock spring, the short leg goes to the bottom, long leg goes to the top. Alright, so just like we pulled it out, I'm holding it just the same way to put it back in. Now what I do is I start, oh, almost forgot, make sure that you put, if this fell out, your roll pin back in to your hammer spring cup, because if you don't, you go to pull on this thing, it's just going to pull on the plastic, and then you're going to be mad because nothing's going to happen but the plastic come out. Now sometimes this little thing can be a bit of a pain, so take your straight pick and just push it in there. Alright, line it up. It also helps if your tools aren't magnetized like mine are. Alright, so we've got that all straight. We're holding everything in place. What we're going to do is we're going to take the chassis just like this. We're going to drop it into the frame at a 90-degree angle, and then we're going to turn it. And if you try and put it in straight down, the hammer spring cup is going to be too wide and it's going to get caught up on stuff. Alright, so we've got it going. Make sure that your hammer pin is lined up on both sides. It likes to slip around. Take our straight pick, push the hammer catch forward at the same time pushing the chassis in. Just like the LC9, we're going to sit there and check that the hammer catch is in the right place. Hammer's moving, so it is. That dadgum pin fell out. If the pin falls out while you're doing this, the best way to do this is take a pair of tweezers and just work it back down in there, because here in a moment we're gonna pull that on up, and once it has tension on it, it's not gonna be loose. So grab with your shepherd's hook right in the middle, pull straight up. If you don't get it right the first time, no big deal, just as long as there's still tension, work it in there. We're seated here, so we now have spring tension, so we can go ahead and pull the trigger and check the hammer. Alright, so we've got this adjusted out just a little too far. Adjust that back some, cock it. Alright, so we're ready to put the frame pins back in, slide back on, and go ahead and function test. Using the polymer side or just your polymer hammer, go ahead and drive the frame pins back in. Alright, I'm going to put the slide back on. Now remember, on a PF-9, when you go to reinstall everything, you need to have the hammer to the rear. If you try and do it this way, you're going to have a lot of tension to fight, which trying to keep this lined up, which I'm going to show you a trick for that too, but trying to keep this lined up and push back the hammer at the same time, kind of a pain. So make sure that's cocked. Now what I like to do is I'll take my 1/16, I'll put it where the takedown pin goes, because it's kind of hard to keep this in place, and I'll rack the slide to the rear, and that kept the barrel lug right where I needed it to be. So we'll go ahead and put the takedown pin in, snap it in place, let the slide go forward, and we are ready to set the pre and post travel screw and function test. Alright, so the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take your 050, and on the RTK trigger, well, and on the Solomon as well, once we have the modified Solomon out, you're going to turn clockwise out far enough that when you go to pull the trigger, the hammer does not fall. I'll say that again. We're going to turn it clockwise to have it stick out far enough that when you pull the trigger, the hammer does not fall. Alright, that's where we want to start out at. You want to make sure that it does not fall first, and then work our way back from there. That's going to give you the most reduction. Alright, so see, our hammer's not falling. So now we're going to take in 1/4 turn at a time, turn counterclockwise, rack it, pull the trigger, counterclockwise 1/4 turn, pull the trigger, hammer falls. All right. Once you get it to that point, see it's right there, and you got to give it a little bit of a squeeze. All right, so once it's there, go ahead and back it off one more quarter turn, and you're good to go. All right, so now for the pre-travel, I'm going to hold the trigger back, and we're going to turn counterclockwise until we don't get our 2 full resets. And as you can see what I'm talking about, the very long pre-travel that the PF-9 has. Now what I like to do with the short stroke, you can see that our top screw, we're all the way out. All right, we've got about 3 threads in. If you get to this point and you still have pre-travel, what you can do is you can swap the pre-travel screw with the post-travel screw. The post-travel screw is slightly longer because we're obviously taking more pre-travel out. Now, that being said, this is going to be dependent, variant upon the tolerances of your particular pistol. From pistol to pistol, this is going to be different. But once you get to the point where you don't get your 2 reset clicks, you're going to start turning it clockwise, 1 turn at a time, until you do. And like I said, if you get all the way out and it's getting wobbly like this was, go ahead and swap the screws. But that's it, guys. That's gonna be it right there. And as you can see, I mean, you're taking out a lot of the pre and post travel. It's a much shorter stroke of the trigger, gets rid of the painful trigger bite that these guns have, and if you combine it with the reduced power spring set for these, it makes a huge difference in this little gun. It makes it very carryable and usable in real world scenarios. And so that's going to wrap it up for this one, guys. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at tech, that's TECH, Tango Echo Charlie Hotel at GallowayPrecision.com. Be sure to follow us on social media, like, comment, and subscribe below here on YouTube, and then follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Gun District, and MeWe. Ground Pounder is coming along nicely, and we will have the first off-road parts up on the website here shortly. They're in production. And stay tuned for more videos on our Instagram feed and probably here on YouTube as I start getting the pistol range and whatnot set up at my house to actually start showing how big of an improvement these products are for the everyday carrier. It's not just going to be me shooting, because while none of you probably believe that I can't hit the broadside of a barn with a pistol, all my training was in carbines and rifles. I'm going to have my wife and some other people come over that are not avid shooters show you that yes, our products will help you as a new shooter and will definitely help you in a personal defense scenario. And that's going to wrap it up, guys. So to recap, this product's already up on the website, ready to roll. The Solomon trigger option will be ready to go here shortly. Ground Pounder Off-Road parts are going to be rolling here before long on the website. Be sure to follow us on social media and keep an eye out for more videos on product testing, actually on paper, and of course, as you all seem to love, exploding watermelons. And that's going to wrap it up, guys. So as always, be safe, be accurate, and God bless.